Okay, we want to get back to this show and talk more about Governor DeSantis' launch with this historic presidential announcement and what it means for the 2024 race. I want to bring in Steve Hayes tonight, NBC News political analyst and editor and CEO of The Dispatch, and Republican strategist Krysia Lenzo. I thank you both for joining Top Story. Steve, I do want to start with you. You've reported on Republican campaigns and elections for a long time. What did you think about this rollout? And talk to me about if there are highlights and where you think some moments possibly were missed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a disaster the way that you've all been talking about it. It was a big risk doing this on Twitter Spaces, and I think the risk didn't pay off. One of the reasons that I think this is likely to last beyond a bad news cycle is a core part of the argument that Ron DeSantis was going to make against Donald Trump was that Donald Trump can talk a lot and he might excite people and he can do big rallies, but he wasn't a very effective president. He didn't get done the things that he said he was going to get done. And DeSantis' argument is that he could come in and instead be a very effective governor, produce results. He, in an exchange later in this Twitter space with radio host Steve Deese, he was asked about policies and what he's done in Florida. He said, well, I produce results. When you have the kind of problems, technical glitches and problems that he has at the top of this discussion, at the top of this announcement, it just puts a dent in that argument, I think.
Krysia, I want to put up some poll numbers for you, okay? And these are national polls we should mention at first, and you shouldn't take too much stock in them, but obviously President Trump is. CNN out with a new one that has Trump polling at 53%, while DeSantis' closest competition is at 26%. Quinnipiac, similar numbers, Trump at 56%, while DeSantis is at 25%. Do you think Republican voters are still open to Governor DeSantis? And is it still so early in the race? Because when you look at that and you see how everyone else is in single digits, Governor DeSantis is really the only person in this race that can match Trump.
I think based on tonight's performance, I think Republican voters will be less inclined to vote for Governor DeSantis. I agree with that previous assessment that there was really nothing newsworthy about what he had to say other than the technical glitches. It's pretty much the same stump speech we've heard all along. And besides using the word woke maybe about 5 times, I was counting, there was nothing new when it came to even international policy and what he will do on the world stage. And I think that's something that Republican voters really are concerned about at this moment in time, especially as we have threats from China, from Russia, and realistically, we don't have a proven record from any of the other candidates who are up in the primary.
I will say this, though. He was touting some of his accomplishments in Florida throughout that speech. It was sprinkled in the Twitter Space conversation. So why did he pick Twitter Spaces? We have a clip of him on the Twitter Space explaining. Let's listen. Talk about the problems on Twitter Spaces and the technological problems. We're having technology problems here as well on Top Story. It happens. Anyways, he said he went there on Twitter Spaces because it's a free speech environment, and that's what him and Elon Musk were talking about. So, I want to ask you, I mean, there's a part of the Republican Party that loves this. They lean into that. Again, Elon Musk has huge high ratings with conservatives. So he is going to get some street cred for that among GOP voters.
He'll definitely get some street cred, but I think when it comes to the general electorate, it did come across as somewhat elitist in the presentation. I think even David Sachs, he was a VC who was moderating this. I mean, people, including Vivek Ramaswamy, talked about how David Sachs was one of the key venture capitalists who was in support of the Silicon Valley, bank financial institution bailout. So that even raises questions about how this is reaching the general retail banking customer, not to take it too far off the rails. But I think when it's Elon Musk at the helm, yes, conservatives love his freedom of speech territory. But ultimately, when it comes to even donations, asking for donations at the end of his speech and also having the reception at the Four Seasons tonight in Miami, I think that doesn't necessarily relate with the average voter.
Yeah, Steve, I got to tell you, I think there's been a lot of reporting about how the the DeSantis campaign has had some stumbles. I got to tell you, I think some of it is unfair because it is still so early in the campaign. He's going to have, I think, a $200 million war chest when it comes to his super PAC. He has somebody who's very experienced and who I should remind viewers won Iowa. Jeff Rowe was running the Ted Cruz campaign. They won Iowa. They beat Trump in a very early contest, which actually catapulted Senator Cruz through the rest of that primary. But I do have to ask you, I mean, there's still time for Governor DeSantis to not only catch up, but to really give Trump a run for his money.
Yeah, I think there is. Look, you have more than half the Republican Party who wants somebody other than Donald Trump. For a long time, it looked like that might be Ron DeSantis. But as you point out, Tom, this is very, very early. And if you listened to the kind of conversation that he was having, he introduced several different speakers. David Sachs introduced several different speakers who asked questions of Ron DeSantis, and he included Thomas Massie, a very conservative member of Congress who asked some questions of Governor DeSantis. You had people who were supportive of Ron DeSantis on his COVID plans in Florida. You have somebody who he's appointed to the board of trustees of the college down in Florida that he's sort of remaking in an anti-woke way. And you imagine if you get past the glitches and get past some of the stumbles, that for conservatives and the conservative base who are open to and frustrated with sort of the culture war, and believe in the arguments that he's making, there's some appeal there, I think. They will listen to some of the things that he's saying and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, he's running a very base campaign based on culture war politics, and he's not the narcissist that Donald Trump is. So it's not hard to imagine that people will say, we kind of like this part of what Trump was offering before, but without the kind of baggage and chaos that Donald Trump brings.
Stephen, do you think we're going to have a repeat of 2016 in the sense that just because what I'm getting from the candidates that have entered the race and the ones that are probably going to enter later, I get a sense that when we get on that debate stage, there's going to be a couple people going after former President Trump, but there's going to be a lot of people going after DeSantis. And we sort of saw this in 2016, right? Yeah. There was Rubio who went after Jeb Bush, and Trump went after Jeb Bush. And then you had Christie going after Rubio, and you had Cruz and Rubio going at it. And eventually what it did is it just made Trump stronger.
Yeah, I mean, you would think these candidates would learn. But look, each of these candidates is running for very distinct reasons. You've had Nikki Haley effectively running against Ron DeSantis and almost going out of her way not to mention or not to criticize Donald Trump. She's at an event in New Hampshire. I guess she's offered some sort of gentle criticism of Trump, but she comes at Ron DeSantis hard, and it's caused people to wonder whether she would like a position, potentially as Donald Trump's running mate. I think you're likely to see some of the same things. They're all trying to be the last candidate. It's going to be Trump against somebody. At least that's the calculation that a lot of Republican strategists have made. They all want to be that somebody. And to that end, it would be very much a replay of 2016.
Krysia, before we go, if you could give Governor DeSantis any advice, what would you tell him?
You have to talk about international policy. It has to be more than just your blueprint for Florida. While you have achieved a tremendous amount in your state and you are a determining factor in terms of how the rest of the country will play out, people want to see your perspective on the world stage. And I think it's very important, especially in this race.
Yeah, you say Ukraine, China. There's so many
100%.
issues there. Krysia Lenzo, we thank you so much. Stephen Hayes, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining Top